July 19th, 2011. Every summer since I was 7, I would go out to California to visit my dad. He would take me up and down the state, visiting all the places a kid would want to go. As I grew older, he started to take me to national parks, like Yellowstone, Redwoods, and Yosemite. During this year in particular, he wanted to go back to Yosemite and rent one of those tents you see in a village campsite. I was really excited, since the last time we were there, we stayed in a hotel that was nearly 2 hours outside of the park. He also mentioned that we should hit the park's infamous Mist Trail that goes up Vernal Falls again, since, well, last time I had difficulty hiking up because my feet were killing me. He even hinted that he wanted to go down the John Muir Trail that was on top of the falls. Now, John Muir, for those of you that don't know, he's a bit of a California legend. He sought to preserve some of the wilderness lands in the United States. His most notable accomplishment was establishing Yosemite as a national park in 1890. But even after his death, the man had a hospital and a middle school named after him. The last bit of information that I want to point out here was during that year, Yosemite set a record of its waterfalls being 3 times more powerful than ever before, due to the amount of snow and rain it had received during the winter and springtime. I think it was even featured on the nightly news when Brian Williams was on there at the time. On the morning of the hike, both my dad and I woke with excitement. The two of us had trained for this day, with me being on the cross-country team for my school and him working out at the gym. We were more than ready to take on such an amazing trail. We packed up our backpacks, put our hiking boots on, and drove my dad's SUV to the trailhead parking lot. When we got there, it was around 8:30, and the parking lot was already full. I guess there were a lot of people eager to see this once-in-a-lifetime moment. We had to park all the way over where Curry Village was. This will be important later. After 1.5 miles, we finally made it to the trailhead. The first part of the Mist Trail is paved, and it has some steep hill inclines, but nothing too extreme. After you reach the end of the paved trail, you go across a footbridge over the stream that's at the bottom of the falls. However, that little stream was a full-blown rapid river. Now, keep in mind, the park at the time had a very limited amount of signs and guardrails around the water areas, so it wasn't uncommon to see people wander off the trail to be by the stream to sunbathe or dip their feet in. Kids would also want to go in and splash each other, like they were at a water park. My dad and I were also guilty of going off the trails to take pictures and such. Some of the pictures I provided for you guys will show just how easy it is to be by the water. As for the park rangers, some of them didn't really mind it at the time. In fact, it was kind of nice having people explore the park, just as long as they were cautious and used good judgment. I haven't been back to Yosemite since this event, so I don't know how strict they are now with this trail. I forgot to mention earlier, but the trail isn't for everybody once you pass the footbridge. It's all uphill, and you have to climb up these stone steps. Some of the stone steps have been eroded or washed away over the years, which made it extra difficult to climb in certain areas, especially when it got to be really narrow. You also have to combat the mist from the falls and not lose your footing. Otherwise, you might fall over the edge and go into the water. After our short break, my dad and I began to head up Vernal Falls, and like I mentioned earlier, the mist from the falls was intense. But it was rewarding in a way. When we got to the top, it was almost noon, and we were ready to tear open our lunches. But before we did that, we went over to the John Muir trailhead while taking some along the way. The trail wasn't too long, but if we wanted to get back to the parking lot, we would have to take another trail, which took way longer than the Mist Trail. We came to the conclusion that we would think about it during lunch, since our hunger was now overwhelming. That's when my dad asked me if we should eat by the falls or find a quieter place. Till this day, I still don't know what made me blurt out that we should find a quieter spot away from the falls and the other noisy tourists. My dad agreed, and we made our way up the river to the point where it became a small creek, and we sat down at the picnic area. There was no one in sight, and all we could hear was the water flowing in the stream and the birds chirping. As we finished up, we saw a bunch of people coming from every direction, and they weren't walking or running. It was as if they were in a rush to get somewhere, but they didn't know where to go. We didn't think anything of it and decided to head over to the stream before we went back to the falls. Now, to get to the stream, you had to walk over a bunch of rocks that were fun to climb and jump over. We approached one such jump over a gap. My dad went first, making it look easy, while I, on the other hand, had to get a running head start. As I made my way over the gap, I heard something hiss and sort of jump at my leg. Upon landing, I quickly turned around to see a coiled-up rattlesnake in the gap, with its eyes fixated on me. Luckily, he didn't bite me, and I was a safe distance away from it if it tried to do anything. I called out for my dad, who was like Indiana Jones when it comes to snakes. I pointed out the snake, and when he saw it, his face turned a pale white. I laughed as he backed away in fear, and as he did that, another hiker was making their way right for the gap. I immediately told him to go around, but he had a confused expression on his face. Then, once he came around to our side and saw the rattlesnake, he took out his phone and took pictures and videos of it. At this point, my dad had had enough, and he made his way to the stream, to which I followed, hoping that that guy wouldn't get bit. The creek was pretty shallow, and it was hard to believe that it turned into this roaring waterfall. I stayed at the edge of the creek to soak my bandana in the cold water, while my dad went in a little further and bent down to do the same. Then, all of a sudden, this Middle Eastern guy came out of nowhere and began talking to my dad in a frantic voice. He said something along the lines of, "Sir, you are not allowed to be in there. Please get out of the water." Like I mentioned earlier, it wasn't uncommon to see people by the water, especially near a small stream like this one. It was very odd, though, because this guy wasn't a park ranger, nor was he dressed for hiking. My dad slowly got up and said to the guy, "We're just soaking our sweatbands before we head back down. Everything's fine." The man grew more serious, more concerned. "Sir, please, you need to get out of the water now. It's very dangerous. I just saw 3 people die right from where you're standing." Then the man turned to me and said, "Son, if you value your father's life, you have to get him out of there." I was completely speechless at this point, but my dad was ignoring the man's pleas. But before either of us could say or do anything, the man ran off trying to warn other tourists that were getting close to the water. After he was out of sight, my dad got out, and we grabbed our backpacks and headed toward the falls. As we were walking, I asked my dad what the guy meant when he said that he saw 3 people die just by standing in a small stream. He looked at me confused as well, but reassured me that maybe they fell in and hurt themselves or something like that. That confused me even more. The stream was not as powerful as the falls, so how could someone lose their footing and die like that? The thought didn't last long, because I was then distracted by the crowd of people that were gathered around the area where I'd spotted the rattlesnake. We wanted to find a park ranger so that no one would get hurt, but for some reason, there wasn't one in sight. We kept walking until we finally made it to the falls, and at that point we were already exhausted from the hike up. We then decided to go back down the mist trail. When we got to the trailhead, there was a large crowd of people blocking the trail. Impatiently, we made our way through the group of confused hikers, and that's when we saw the caution tape all along the trail itself. There must have been 15 park rangers scouting the area and telling hikers coming up the trail to turn back immediately. Someone asked the park rangers why they were closing off the trail, and in the most calm and professional tone, the park ranger replied, "Oh, everything is all right. There was a dead animal that was found on the trail, and the smell is really unbearable. We're trying to remove it, but for now the mist trail is closed until further notice. Everyone here will have to take the John Muir Trail to get back down." Right away, I knew something was off. There was way too much caution tape for just one dead animal. And why would they be taping off the edges that were near the falls? Also, the two park rangers that were on the trail weren't looking on the trail itself. They were looking down into the water. Then I heard static on one of the radios. All I could make out was something about missing hikers. The John Muir Trail turned out to be a pretty nice detour. That was until we hit the Panorama Trail. It was caked in horse droppings, and the smell was as bad as you could imagine, but it went on for 10 miles. We caught up with some of the other hikers along the way, and they were speculating about what actually happened. One said that it was a bear that died, and the rangers had to get a dump truck to haul it away. Another said it was a moose or a deer. I swear it's pretty funny what people come up with in these types of situations, but all of them would be wrong. About 2 hours later, we all finally got to the bottom of the trail. My legs felt like jelly at that point, and we still needed to get to the parking lot. On our way there, we spotted a park ranger standing guard at the missed trailhead. Curiosity got the better of my dad, and he went over to the ranger, asking what actually happened. The ranger, knowing that my dad was not buying the whole dead animal story, let out a sigh and, with a hesitant expression on his face, answered, "There were these 3 hikers that were part of a church group. They all decided to go over the railings that were near the top of the falls to take some pictures. The first victim went into the water and eventually lost their footing and fell. It was only a matter of time for the current to take him down the waterfall. Then 2 more hikers went in to try to save him, but they also lost their footing, and they were overtaken by the current. It was at this point people who were witnessing this occurrence discouraged others from jumping in, unless they wanted the same to happen to them. If the drop didn't kill them instantly, then the rocks below would have torn them apart. The trail was closed shortly after in fear of one of their bodies being found on it." I sat there mortified. If we had decided to eat our lunch there, we would have been part of the many dozens of people that witnessed this horrible event, unable to do anything but stand there watching as 3 people fell to their fate. What the ranger said next still haunts me to this day. Due to the falls and rapids being as powerful as they are now, we can't recover the bodies until it dies down in October or even November. My heart sank into my chest, thinking about the friends and family members of the victims waiting so long for there to be a recovery operation. We got into the car, our legs were aching from that 12-mile hike, and for the rest of the way back, it was silent. I never brought it up again to my dad, and that was that. I still think about that guy who told me and my dad to get out. I don't know what I would have done if my dad was one of those victims. This just goes to show you that no picture is worth risking your own life. A later article would follow up on the bodies being recovered. I'll summarize it here. Hormuz David, 22 years old, the first to be discovered a month after the incident. He was pinned against a boulder 240 feet downstream. Ninos Jacob, age 27, found on November 29th, trapped under towering boulders that weren't visible until the river level was at its lowest. Then, that following Saturday, Ramina Badal, 21 years old, was found. The 3 of them were from the close-knit community of Central Valley Christians from the Middle East. My heart goes out to the friends and families of the victims. I believe this photo I took may have shown the victims before they died. May they rest in peace. The Woods of Yosemite and Stanislaus, from 3rdgr2t@gmail.com. I am a local to the Mariposa and Yosemite National Park area. I've lived here as far as I can remember. In my time here, I've definitely experienced weird things. While I have several other stories, I shall tell the one that sticks with me the most. I am Native American from several tribes, including Navajo and Miwok. As far as I can remember, even as a little kid, something has always bothered me about the Mariposa and Yosemite area as a whole. This particular event took place towards where Yosemite and Stanislaus National Forest meets. It was deer season, and me and some family went hunting within the Stanislaus National Forest. We had heard about an area that had some decent-sized bucks. We decided to set up camp, then head out the next morning. The area we set up camp in had a clearing to our left and a hill in the distance, with forest and brush to the right. This was the first time I'd ever hunted this specific area, but according to some family, the hill in the distance across the clearing was an old Native American burial ground, but this claim I was never able to prove or disprove, no matter how much I researched. The first night was very uneventful and quiet, like dead quiet. No owls, no coyotes, nothing. We spent the next day hunting with no luck, besides spotting a few birds. As we came back to camp and night settled in, we noticed once again it was dead quiet. Later that night, I am up alone thinking to myself when I begin to hear footsteps. I didn't think much of it. I mean, we were in the woods, right? I was probably just assuming it was an animal. The night was clear, after all, no clouds and a full moon with lots of stars. But the longer I listened, the louder and heavier these footsteps got. But as I looked outside, I couldn't see anything. We were on flat ground, but I could see nothing. I started to think that was weird. I did a small scan all around with a flashlight, and still nothing. I could still hear the footsteps along with a low odor that I couldn't distinguish. Just as I began to wonder about how weird this was, I heard a howl off in the distance. It was closely followed by several more. The thing that took me by surprise is the fact the howling I heard got a reply that was way too close for comfort. This howling continued as well as the footsteps for most of the night. It seemed to get close and then distance itself several times over. I get that most of you hearing this probably think it was some random normal animal. I myself thought it must have been coyotes, but I realized that didn't make sense, as coyotes don't have heavy-sounding footsteps or a weird underlying smell like that. I definitely felt watched, but tried to rationalize it to myself. I just couldn't find a good explanation that suited my mind. The following day was quite uneventful, just more hunting with little to no animals seen. Though it did seem almost quiet again, no birds or anything making noise except for the occasional breeze. That night we broke camp and went back to Mariposa. While the day was fine, the night was not. When I was home that night, I had the overwhelming feeling of being watched. I felt extremely paranoid. This feeling seems to happen every time I'm back close to the border of Stanislaus and Yosemite, or when I'm in Stanislaus National Forest, even if this event is not on my mind. Camino del Diablo, by an anonymous poster on 4chan. A while back, when I was a teenager, I went on a summer trip across the southwest USA. The group consisted of my sister, my dad, my stepmom, and I. We were finishing up seeing Yosemite, heading through inland California towards San Francisco. My dad was driving, and my stepmom was asleep at the time. So my sister and I were playing Pokemon Platinum on our DSs. It was late at night, probably around 1 to 2 a.m. Our DSs, sadly, eventually ran out of battery, so we just look out the window to pass the time. The landscape outside is mountainous. I was looking down into a valley. The road twists and bends through the hills. It was a new moon night, and I couldn't see any of the scenery other than the outlines of the hills. Nobody is on the road because it's so freaking late. Suddenly, my sister points out a pair of headlights off in the distance. Probably because we're so bored, we start to get excited. We tell Dad, who tells us to be quiet because we'll wake our stepmom. We round a bend in the road and the car goes out of sight, blocked by a hill in front of us. When we come back around, the headlights are gone. My sister and I flip out. We tell Dad, and he says he saw it too. My dad's a cop. He's worried that it might be people trying to rob us or something, so he wakes up my stepmom. We drive around looking for the car. On my side, it's a straight drop down into the valley below. On my sister's side, it's the face of a cliff. There was nowhere for the car to go but forwards or backwards. We go slow. Dad turns on the brights. We all get a good look around. Our headlights eventually reflect off of something. Dad drives us up to investigate. It's an old brick archway. From the 30s, it looked like. Maybe later. It leads into a tunnel, crudely cut into the mountain. Dad parks the car, taking his flashlight and 9mm, and gets out. My sister and I go with him, but stepmom stays in the car. We walk down the tunnel, which to us kids looks like it could go on forever. After a while of walking, we see something in the distance. It's the car. It looked like one of those old cars from the 40s or 50s. Dad keeps his 9mm steady at his hip as we approach. The car was running, but oddly enough, there was no one inside. We get creeped out. My dad looks around to see if the driver is around anywhere. Suddenly, the car just takes off down the tunnel. My sister panics and freaks out, crying and running back to our car. Dad takes off after her. I ran too, trying to follow the car myself. It seems like I go on forever until I finally see a light. What the heck is inside this mountain, I wonder? And how deep does it go? I get to the end of the tunnel, and it's the valley during the day. I wasn't in there that long, was I? The car was also gone, and the road as well, for that matter. I looked around for the road, but I could not find it at all. Looking down into the valley, I see one of those wagon trains formed into a circle. It seems out of place, out of time. It doesn't make sense, but I swear I see them fighting off an attack by a Native American tribe. I can hear gunshots. I suddenly realize where the heck I am. I turn around and run back into the tunnel. I keep running until I see the light at the other end. It's our car. I get inside as fast as I can. Dad takes off and I tell everyone what I saw. Everyone is shocked except stepmom, who's skeptical of it all. Eventually, we hear sirens behind us and Dad pulls over. A state trooper walks up to the window. He tells Dad he was going over the speed limit. You know, you folks ought to be careful around these parts. Strange things are known to happen on this highway. I swear I saw him wink at me when he said that. He lets Dad off with a warning, and my stepmom takes the wheel. We don't stop until we get to San Francisco. Later on in my youth, I spent a lot of time fishing and just messing around by the lake near my house. It wasn't on our property, but it was about a 15-minute walk and no one else was ever around it. I used to think of it as my own private lake. My dad assumed it was owned by someone or some company who's holding on to it, just hoping the value will increase over time. He tells me I can play there as long as I don't mess anything up or leave anything behind. He also tells me if you see anyone out there, get your butt back home, alright? Those were the terms I abided by in order to have my own private lake. One day I invited my friend Josh over to the lake. We decided we'd try to make a raft. We never got one working, but we did get soaked, so we lay in the sun to dry off for a while. Our shoes and socks were soaked, so we went barefoot. By the time we were done playing, the sun was beginning to set. I wanted to go home, but we'd brought our fishing poles and hadn't fished yet. Plus, the fish always bite more at dusk, according to Josh. I guess he was wrong, because we didn't manage to catch a thing. It was pitch black by the time I convinced him we should go. While we were packing up, a soft female voice comes out of the darkness. "Where are you going? Come play in the lake with me." It was the friendliest voice I'd ever heard, so much so that I wasn't even afraid. "Hey y'all, come down here and see me." The voice was so sweet and welcoming. We both began to edge forward to see where it was coming from. "Crap, crap," Josh hollered, shocking me out of the daze I was in. He'd stepped on a fishing hook. I must have left it sitting there a long time ago. The sudden clarity let me think enough to decide to grab Josh and drag him away with me, though he was more hopping away. We never went there again. Josh remembers the event, but everyone thinks it's a tall tale. Lost a good pair of shoes that night. I told my dad I'd lost them, so he didn't make me go back and get them. It was hopefully just someone making a joke, and we flipped out like a couple of dorks. Hopefully sirens don't live in lakes.